Shabbat shalom, everyone. So it's been our custom to use the month of Elul, as Rabbi Trina Reader mentioned. That's the month we are in, the month that leads to the High Holy Days, to offer special sermon materials that prepare us, heart, body, mind, soul, for the holidays, which are in just a few weeks from now. We hope to see everyone there. And as I was looking through this week's Torah portion, which you can imagine always comes during the month of Elul, I realized that I had a unique opportunity to share with you something that is very, very small and very, very sort of quirky and obscure. It happens in this week's Torah portion, but for generations, this has been the most prime example of Jewish law and the way that Jewish law works. It's a very famous mitzvah. And it's a perfect example of all of Judaism's goal. What is the reason for mitzvot in general? It is not, as we so often teach, to create a perfect world, to make sure that every person is taken care of in this world, but rather it is to help each one of us become the best version of ourselves. I want to show you what I mean with this one kind of quirky mitzvah. So the Torah portion begins with a rather dismal view of humanity. According to the text, if you see all of the laws and things that we are not supposed to do, well, you would imagine that, of course, we are very busy going out there and doing these terrible things. According to the text, we are taking captives for our wives. We are despising our children, for they are rebellious and argumentative. We apparently put people to death on a regular basis by stoning, so that this week we review the proper procedure for doing so, which is also, by the way, what you do with your rebellious and argumentative children, according to the text. And then you get to this mitzvah, this very strange, but as I mentioned, very famous mitzvah. And here's how it goes. If you are walking along and you find a nest with eggs in it, you are permitted to take the eggs from the nest. However, and the mitzvah is very clear about this, you have to first shoo away the mother bird. Shoo away the mother bird, take the eggs for breakfast. It is famous not only because it's very small and very curious, but also because of the reward that is mentioned. In fact, this is one of the very few mitzvot which promise any sort of reward at all. And here, it's the same reward that the Torah lists for what we might call some of the great mitzvot of them all. For example, honoring your parents. It is the same. It's the same reward for following this mitzvah, and this is it: in order that it may go well with you, and your days will be long. This is a curious mitzvah because it seems so small, and the reward is so great. It is a curious mitzvah because it is so unclear what it is we are supposed to make of it. Is it, as some think, just a simple question of empathy, that we should care for the mother bird and not subject her to this terrible tragedy of losing her eggs? We all know we care for our children, even the ones that cry. We care for all of them. And perhaps we are supposed to develop empathy for the mother bird. But there are other traditional thoughts on this mitzvah. In fact, traditionally, there are two. The Ramban, Nachmanides, in the 1200s, offers us a very curious interpretation for what is at the heart of this mitzvah. He says, the reason is so that we will not have a cruel heart and be merciless. Perhaps you could imagine that as a form of empathy. Alternatively, he writes, the Torah does not permit us to cause extinction, to uproot an entire species, even though we are allowed to help ourselves to individual members of a species. In other words, conservation. We are supposed to ensure that there will be eggs not only for us and for today, but for tomorrow and for other people. Well, first things first. The second reason we should not take the bird with her eggs is that the species should survive. It reminds us that we have a tremendous power in our hands to affect entire species. In fact, we have power to affect an entire planet. We know this is true today in ways that the Torah actually could never have imagined. By sending off a mother to continue to breed when we take her eggs, ensures that the species and our entire way of life, not to mention theirs, is sustainable. Let's just leave that for a moment, because it's also very interesting the way that he describes the first explanation. We should not take the bird with her eggs so that we do not develop a heart of cruelty. It seems to be about inculcating ourselves with a degree of sensitivity and kindness. Empathy is something that needs to be practiced. Certain acts, the Torah tells us, might be technically permissible, but they seem cruel, and so they are prohibited, to teach us not to be cruel. Now this is, I think, a separate argument from the anthropomorphization of birds. Do we know that birds care for their young in the same way we do? This text is not concerned about the bird's feelings, but rather that we should not develop a heart of cruelty. A generation later, there's another famous commentary that adds one other key word. He says, we should not be cruel through our voraciousness. That's a direct translation. Being voracious, that's a different worry than a concern about species extinction. It takes that idea to a new level. The commentary suggests that through our appetites, that we might cease to consider sustainability at all. That in our ego, it just might be so large that one day we will look out at the world and believe that all of it is for our taking. And that the concern of that is not just the draining of Earth's resources, but the concern for our souls, what it does to us as a species, what it does to us as human beings. For us to consider that the Earth's natural resources are ours and ours alone, that is veracity, voraciousness. In Hebrew, the word is ra'avtanut, from the word for hunger. And they don't consider that sort of unappeasable appetite to be a mistake. It's not us just breaking a little law. It is a character flaw. And for them, this is a major concern. Perhaps that helps us explain why the reward might be so great for the seemingly random mitzvah, because it contains within it the seed of a tremendous idea. That whenever we use the natural resources of this beautiful planet, it's not enough for us to just conserve. We also need to develop a mindset of conservation. It's not enough for us to just sustain the earth, but rather to develop as a character trait to remind ourselves to be sustainable, to live sustainably. That enables us to approach in every way the bounty of our lives with gratitude. And truly that, I think, is the Torah's point. It is far too easy for us to just grumble about it when the price of a gallon of gas or a gallon of milk, for that matter, when it goes up. It's far too easy for us to forget that fruits and vegetables are in season at a specific time of year and not all year round, because we live in a world where all of these things are accessible to us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They are available in the stores. I remember one year when I lived in Los Angeles when El Pollo Loco, which was a major chain restaurant, it was forced to stop offering black beans because the hurricane season in Florida had devastated the harvest of black beans for that year. And I got to thinking at that time, What large-scale catastrophe would it take in our day and age for black beans across the country to become unavailable? And do you remember the year that black beans were not available? No. What would it take for us to notice? The end of the verse, which promises a great reward for doing this seemingly obscure mitzvah, it also has prompted many commentaries over the centuries. Why does this funny little commandment about shooing away a mother bird, which, by the way, rarely ever happens — I don't know that you or I will ever be in this situation — why does this merit an equally rare promise of a reward, and a great one? So let's listen again, just one more time, to the text. If you come upon a bird's nest, and it contains young, or it contains eggs, if the mother is sitting upon the nest, you shall not take the mother with her young. You shall send away the mother, and then you may take the young for yourself, in order that it should go well with you and you should lengthen your days. It actually doesn't sound so much like the explanation of a reward at all, but the natural outcome of bringing this sort of mentality into the world. God doesn't reward people who shoo away birds from their nests. But when we do pay attention to the way that we interact with our environment, when we interact with the planet, when we become more aware of where our food comes from and our gasoline, when we become aware of the way that we use these resources, when we begin to care about clean air and water for us, for all humanity, and for all of nature, we then lengthen our days and life goes well for us. The high holidays, as they arrive, are not just about looking inward and a time for introspection. Traditionally, we sound the shofar every day of this month of Elul to call ourselves to action, to summon us from sleep. I know that many of you will take the work that is laid out in the liturgy very seriously, to enter into a new year with a sense of desperately needed renewal and purpose. May this be the year that we also turn outward and turn upward for that purpose and renewal, towards God, towards our community, to focus on social justice and environmentalism in Indianapolis and abroad, to develop sustainable and environmentally conscious ways of being in the world for ourselves and our community, to bring the world out of this place of despair and conflict and strife into a new era of prosperity that begins with every one of us transforming ourselves into individuals advocating for sustainability and responsibility. This can only come when we become more responsible about the way that we build community day by day, Shabbat by Shabbat. It's such an important idea from such an obscure little mitzvah. Shabbat shalom.